What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for The Flash Season 5, Episode 10, titled The Flash and the Furious, which was the first episode of 2019 of The Flash. This episode continues where Episode 8 left off, with Nora going to 2049 to confront Thawne about the fact that he killed her grandmother, Nora Allen. I'm guessing that's the reason she wasn't in the Elseworlds crossover, which is that during it, she was in 2049, which doesn't really make any sense. That's not how time travel works, but anyway, that's not really a problem for this episode. It's more a problem of Episode 8 and 9. But basically, the whole storyline with Nora and Thawne in this episode was all about Nora learning to see the good in certain villains, which I did like that storyline a lot. I did like that whole, So the whole storyline with Thawne and Nora in this episode was about Nora learning to see the good in certain villains like Captain Cold or Weather Witch, and I did like that storyline quite a lot. There's this one scene between Nora and Barry where Barry mentions characters like Captain Cold and even Reverse Flash and says that either they already became heroes or they can definitely change, and I like that scene quite a lot. Now, I don't think he's right about Reverse Flash. Reverse Flash is not a character who should ever become a hero. He is not like Captain Cold or Deathstroke, where he was a villain and he could become either an anti-hero or a superhero. I don't think that he should. I think he should stay a villain forever. So Nora will probably learn to trust him and then free him from his cell, and that will bite Team Flash in the ass, where he is going to be either the main villain of next season or a future season, or he's just going to be a villain in Season 5 as well. This is not going to end well for Team Flash, but something that was revealed about Reverse Flash in the future is that he's not just in a cell, he's on death row, which means that he's being prepped for execution, and I mean, that's basically what they implied. They said that Thawne doesn't really have a lot of time to live, or they said the time isn't on his side, which they have said before, specifically in Legend of Tomorrow Season 2, when Black Flash was chasing, but then it pans up to a countdown from 51 minutes, implying that in 51 minutes from now, he is going to be executed by the police, I guess, or the judicial system in the future, which is interesting because obviously that's not how it's going to work. Like, it's not in the next episode this is going to happen, even though it is in 51 minutes. There's time travel, so they can extend that for a very long time, with Nora just returning every single episode, and Thawne just has like 100 different conversations with Nora in just 1 hour. Obviously, she can't really go back to the time where she already was, so she's going to, every single time she goes, it'll get closer and closer. I'm guessing it'll get to like 1 minute, and then he or she will let him out of the cell, which will be a very interesting, probably like episode 15 or 16 around then, and that will propel the rest of the season, or maybe even Season 6 forward. It's possible that she will actually release him from his cell in the season finale of this season. But getting past all of the Thawne stuff in this episode, there was the trial of Weather Witch, which I did actually like because we don't usually see the trials of villains of the week or recurring villains, because she is more of a recurring villain, or any villain really. Now, it's not something you want to see every single episode, but it is interesting to do it here or there, especially when it fits into the episode like this one. I think the trial and the whole episode in general did a pretty good job of making Weather Witch herself a better villain, or a better character in general, a more three-dimensional character, like compared to episode 7 where she first appeared. She really felt like a very cheesy one-dimensional villain of the week that I didn't feel like should or would have returned. She returned in this episode, which I wasn't really excited for that, but I do think she became a much better character after this episode, partially because of the trial, partially because of her connected storyline with Nora, and how she actually had other things in her storyline other than just being a villain like in episode 7, so I did like that quite a lot. One thing I didn't really love from the trial came from when Barry and Nora left the trial to chase down the future Silver Ghost and that car. First of all, the chase scene with the car, that was just terrible. The way they cut it just made it impossible to follow what was going on. It's pretty clear they wanted to imitate the Fast and the Furious, which is why the episode is titled The Flash and the Furious, and either they just did a very bad job with that, or it's possible they did it on purpose to make fun of the franchise and make fun of all the cuts that it has in the car chase scenes. It's definitely possible, and if so, then I do like this scene. If not, and they actually wanted to make it look like a good chase scene, they did a very bad job. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when Barry gets compromised or incapacitated by the car, and he can't stop vibrating. That's not the problem. The problem here is the whole story, or the whole plot point of a character going to a trial and he needs to testify but then he needs to leave for a couple minutes, and then he can't return, so he has to be replaced. I don't know, that's such a specific thing, but it happens so many times. I can't really say any specific examples, I don't really remember, but I really remember in a lot of TV shows that happening a lot, and it's just so damn cliche. It's not really a huge problem because I did think that they did a pretty good job with what this led to, which is Nora taking the lead in this episode, which I didn't mind for one episode, but I mean, the actual plot point of him leaving and not being able to return and being replaced by somebody else as testimony, that was just such a cliche moment. So obviously Barry was benched in this episode, really. He was put in the metahuman vault and he didn't really do anything much in this episode. He had some conversations with like Nora, like I mentioned earlier, one with Sherlock near the end, but for the most part he didn't really do much, which was fine because I didn't mind Nora taking the lead for one episode, but I don't think they should have done it in episode 10. I mean, we haven't seen the Flash in a couple weeks now, and to return now and him not really to do anything, or to return to watch him just sit there and then not do anything, at least as the Flash, that was kind of lame. It wasn't terrible. I mean, it was, like I said, I didn't mind Nora taking the lead, but I don't think they should have done that in this episode when we haven't seen Barry or the Flash in around a month. But that brings me to the villain of this week, Silver. Ghost named Rhea Van Zat. Now, she felt kind of like a side character compared to Weather Witch in this episode, which I don't mind. Weather Witch is a much better character at this point. It's possible that she will get her own episode, Silver Ghost, where she becomes a better character. For some reason, I doubt it. It's not really something I want to see either. She's just not an interesting character, like, in the slightest. Her powers are super boring, and after this episode, I don't see them using her powers, like, at all, or at least, I mean, her meta tech powers. I mean, those powers are so gimmicky, they cannot use it really outside of this one episode, so hopefully she doesn't return very much, and hopefully she doesn't really become a recurring villain. But one thing I don't really like about her character is something I mentioned in my synopsis breakdown of this episode, which is that Silver Ghost in the comics is absolutely nothing like Silver Ghost on the show. But just running through the differences real quick, the only similarity they have is the name Van Zat, where in the comics his name is Raphael Van Zat, while on the show her name is Rhea Van Zat, so that's really the only similarity they have. In the comics, he is a Freedom Fighters villain, while on the show, she is a Flash villain. In the comics, he has the power to turn things into silver, while on the show, she has a Metatech object that can control cars, which are two things that are completely unrelated to each other. And the biggest one, in the comics, he is a guy, while in the show, she is a woman, which is a gender swap I don't mind that much. This is not a character I've ever heard of, but I mean, the differences between these two characters are so abundantly clear that Silver Ghost is probably the second least comic book accurate character in the Arrowverse, right behind James Olsen. Now, in general, I don't really like this version of Silver Ghost. I don't like this character very much. It's possible that I will like her over the course of this season, but like I said, her powers are so gimmicky and her powers are so boring. Her character in general is so boring that I just don't see that happening. But anyway, there are two other storylines I didn't mention, specifically Cisco creating a metahuman cure and Caitlin getting in the way, and the other one, which is Sherlock investigating Nora, which I will go over after I talk about Cisco's storyline. So the whole storyline with Cisco creating a cure, I felt like it was a very compelling storyline, but it wasn't a storyline that had any point to it, really. I mean, if you think about it, the whole conflict here is that Caitlin doesn't want the cure to be made because she doesn't want to get rid of Killer Frost. But if you think about it, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody said that Cisco would force the cure on anybody. Like, that was never even implied. It felt like throughout the episode they implied that if he made the cure, everybody would have to take it. But I never thought that. Like, the whole time I was thinking he's going to make a cure and it will be optional. That's obviously how it's going to go. So even though I do think this storyline was pretty compelling, especially the scene where Cisco talks about how he wants a normal life and he wants to grow old with a wife and he wants to have a kid, I did like that scene. That was a very compelling scene in general, and both Cisco and Caitlin were pretty good. They have obviously a lot of chemistry in scenes like this, but I mean, the whole storyline was so pointless and it felt like they really dragged it out so much more than they needed to, so I'm really conflicted about what I think about this storyline. I think in general I like it, but it's also pretty pointless. But then there's the storyline of Sherlock investigating Nora, which is his whole point on the show at this point, is to investigate Nora, why she's here, what she's going to do here, and how she got here, and who she's working with, which is obviously Eobard Thawne, and I do like it a lot. I feel like Sherlock has become a pretty great character in this season. It's been a while since I actually liked a version of Harrison Wells on the show. Specifically, it has been since season 2 of The Flash, but I do actually really like Sherlock. I feel like he's a very entertaining character, and all of the investigation scenes are very, very interesting. Though I do think that he doesn't really need to be here. I mean, those scenes can be given to Ralph. He is a detective, and he wasn't in this episode, probably because they didn't have room for him. They could have replaced that scene, or all those scenes, or really his whole storyline with Ralph's characters. So that's one thing I don't really love in this season, where they're giving Sherlock more screen time than Ralph, because Ralph wasn't in this episode at all. But for what we're given, I do think Sherlock is pretty great, and I do like the storyline of him investigating Nora quite a lot, and this episode might have done it better than any episode before it. I really like all the mystery behind it, and I really like Sherlock's, basically, like his whole investigation of Nora. I like it a lot, and this episode did a pretty great job at that storyline. In conclusion, this was a pretty solid return for The Flash. Barry was benched, which was kind of lame. Silver Ghost was a pretty mediocre villain. There were a lot of cliche moments and some bad chase scenes, and one of the storylines was pretty pointless, but there was the whole storyline with Nora learning to see the good in villains, which I did like. All these revelations about Thawne, the Sherlock Wells scenes investigating Nora, and although it was pointless, the side storyline with Cisco and Caitlin was extremely compelling. So I will give this episode an 8.6 out of 10. But let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below, and if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to see my reviews for the first 9 episodes of The Flash Season 5, a link will be in the description and in the top right corner of the video to the playlist for all my reviews. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching.